This is Enterprise Products Partners Terminal at the Houston Ship Channel in Texas. It is one of the largest exporters of propane in the U.S. VLGCs, or very large gas carriers like these, are loading and transporting a record amount of propane from the States. The U.S. exported just 72,000 barrels in the first week of June 2010. The country shipped out 1.7 million barrels in the first week of this past April alone. These VLGCs owned by Enterprise Products supply around 700,000 barrels a day of LPG, a mix of propane and butane in 2024. The entire U.S. exported an average of 862,000 barrels a month 20 years ago.
If you have an appetite for propane, chances are the first call you're going to make is to the U.S.
Because ours is cheaper. This propane is often bound for countries like China, Japan, and Mexico. So how did the U.S. become the biggest exporter of propane? And will the ongoing tariff war impact its dominance?
Propane is a byproduct. No one produces propane on purpose. So with respect to both natural gas processing and oil refining, propane is automatically a byproduct.
The propane you're familiar with is processed at facilities just like these. They're called fractionators, and their goal is to separate, or fraction off, the hydrocarbons within natural gas or crude oil.
That mixed natural gas liquids hit what we call a de-ethanizer tower, and what we're doing is we're using the boiling point of the entrained liquids. So the first boiling point is ethane. We come in and apply heat, and the ethane as a gas separates itself from that mixed natural gas liquid stream, and the ethane will boil off the top, and the rest of the liquids will go out of the first tower. Then they'll go to the second tower, and that second tower is called a depropanizer, and there we'll come in and focus on the boiling point of propane, and then the remaining natural gas liquids, which are the butanes and the natural gasoline, heavier, and they'll come in and fall out the bottom of the tower. We would then take that to that underground storage that we have at Mont Belvieu in the Salt Dome caverns, and then our customers will pull product out of those caverns through our distribution pipelines.
The charts of both natural gas and crude oil production show the meteoric rise in domestic energy production over the last 15 years. Including propane in this production chart shows that its output is proportional.
We're going to see more production of natural gas liquids, and as a part of that, propane coming primarily out of the Permian.
The Permian Basin is a vast oil and gas producing region spanning West Texas and southeastern New Mexico. It's also a key driver of the shale revolution. The shale revolution refers to the use of advanced technologies like fracking and horizontal drilling to extract oil and gas from tight formations, which significantly transformed the U.S. energy landscape.
What's driven this is the success that producers have had in the shale.
Starting in about 2008, hydraulic fracturing of natural gas came into play, so that really boosted the supply of natural gas into the United States. Propane produced from natural gas processing went from about 500,000 barrels a day in the early 2000s to over 2 million barrels a day now. There has been so much more produced in the last 15 to 20 years because of the shale revolution.
Over that same period of time, we've seen the demand for propane domestically go down. So if you would, to come in and balance the market, we saw this increase in demand for U.S. propane internationally, and that's what led to the growth in exports.
China, 67%. That's tariffs charged to the USA, including...
Several countries import propane from the United States, but China's growth patterns largely outpace the rest.
China is very dependent on the United States for its propane, and because it wants to make certain sectors of its economy, particularly the chemical sector, more competitive, it's going to need US propane in order to be able to do that.
However, a tax on this trade could prove costly for the importer. The exporter, Enterprise Product Partners, says it's not concerned.
So I don't really worry about it.
It's hard to see why China would put on retaliatory tariffs on imports of U.S. energy into the China market, because it's something they need.
We got some breaking news overnight. China raising its tariff on U.S. goods now to 125%.
When it comes to propane and other what are known as LPGs, liquefied petroleum gases, I think tariffs complicate the picture a lot more for U.S. exports of those products to China.
But what is clear is the country's energy dependence isn't slowing down.
China can switch its purchases to the Middle East if it needs to, but that particular spread means that it's going to be very costly and actually undermines the strategy, which is to make the chemical industry more competitive, leaner, and more efficient.
U.S. propane is cheaper than Qatar's or the United Arab Emirates. While these Middle Eastern countries are increasing production, the U.S. still leads in output and exports.
We see some of those countries ramping up production, but not to the extent that the U.S. producer can do it. I mean, to us, the U.S. production can ramp by 200,000+ barrels a day, maybe even 300,000+ barrels a day of propane annually. We've got the supply here. I think other countries like Qatar, to a degree, can maybe match that production increase, but they can't do it year in, year out based on what their resource is.
And several U.S. companies are expanding capacity to meet the new demand.
This symbiotic relationship between Chinese demand and U.S. energy industry has been going along pretty swimmingly and was projected to basically continue over the next couple of years. So while others like Qatar and maybe other OPEC-related countries could fill the gap to some degree, it's really the U.S. that was supposed to step in and fill this demand.
Mexico, on the other hand, heavily relies on the U.S. for propane. In January 2025, it imported 6.4 million barrels of propane, making it the third largest importer on our list.
While Mexico does produce some of its own propane, it is heavily reliant on U.S. propane imports. So to the extent they slap tariffs on U.S. propane, they would also be raising their own industry's cost.
And there's a lot of product that leaves from our export facilities by water and goes to Mexico, as well as a lot of product that moves inland by truck and by rail. If tariffs would wind up being applicable to those movements, then the market would have to account for how to pay for those tariffs.
The propane trade with Canada is much different, but it has a larger impact on U.S. consumers. In January, the U.S. imported 5.7 million barrels of propane from Canada while exporting just over 100,000, resulting in a trade gap of 5.6 million barrels.
We are still very heavily reliant on Canadian propane because of the way the supply infrastructure works in the United States.
The good news is that propane from Canada qualifies under the USMCA, a 2020 free trade agreement between the US, Mexico, and Canada, meaning no tariffs applied to Canadian-supplied propane. However, if propane were to lose its exemption status, it would impact US consumers.
So those tend to be rural areas, those tend to be socioeconomically poorer areas in a lot of instances, not all. Socioeconomically disadvantaged folks rely on this for their heat. A tariff being implemented on propane is really going to hit folks hard.
The midstream energy companies say they aren't worried about the threat of tariffs wiping away big business, particularly enterprise product partners.
They're all asking for more. So our docks are chock-a-block full, and I think they will stay that way.
Enterprise is even building at this exact export facility in Houston to support the new demand. The company states these docks will be able to export nearly 80% more LPG by year-end 2026. As export capacity expands domestically and internationally, one industry expert believes the price gap between domestic and global markets could decrease.
I think that spread will narrow as more capacity comes online for terminaling.
As other countries ramp up production to meet rising demand in Asia, the key question now is whether the U.S. can hold its position as the world's top propane exporter.
By definition, it really has to. This is product that U.S. producers are pumping out. They are counting on the global LPG market to absorb these exports because there's nowhere else for it to go. U.S. domestic consumption of propane has been stagnant over the last decade, and so each incremental molecule of production of propane, by definition, has to go offshore. So from our perspective, U.S. propane is going to have to price in a way to make that happen.